tonight we'll drift into a tale of soft waves, mischievous gods, and one particularly confused pirate ship, where nothing went as planned and everything somehow fermented into legend. Dim your lights, settle under your blanket, and if this calm journey helps you unwind, tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. And while you're here, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments, and maybe the time you're watching this too. It's always a quiet joy to see this sleepy little myth travel across the world. Now let the tide of an old story carry you somewhere strange, somewhere sleepy, somewhere wonderfully boring. The day started like any other sleepy morning in the Aegean. The wind whispered over lazy waves, a few seagulls squawked with half-hearted ambition, and somewhere in the haze of sea spray, a crew of mildly grumpy pirates stumbled across their deck with all the grace of hungover fishermen. There was nothing particularly special about this crew, except, of course, for what they accidentally did next. They found him. He was standing on the shore, barefoot, wrapped in linen that shimmered just enough to suggest he might not be local. Hair like black honey, lips curved in a knowing smile, and a kind of glow. Not literal, not like a torch or anything, but the kind of glow you get when you know something ridiculous is about to happen, and you're the only one in on the joke. The pirates squinted. "Traveller," the captain called, "where are you headed?" The man didn't reply, just smiled, tipped his head like a cat who knew where the treats were hidden. Eventually he spoke, and his voice was like wine in the sun, warm, rich, slightly slurred with leisure. "Anywhere you're going," he said. Now, you might think sailors would be cautious about strange, glowing men on lonely shores. But these weren't thoughtful men. They were the sort who believed in strong drink and short questions. So they shrugged, helped him aboard, and set sail again, toward nothing in particular. Let me tell you, the first clue should have been the grapes. No one packed grapes. They spoil fast, squish easily, and frankly, they weren't exactly budget-friendly back then. But somehow, their guest had them, perfectly ripe, purple and cold as if just plucked from a shaded vine. He offered them a round. The crew took them, ate, smacked their lips thoughtfully, then the giggling began. Not raucous laughter, not wild hysteria, just the sort of giggling that starts in the back of the throat and says, "I don't know what's funny, but everything is." The air on the ship changed. It got sweeter, thicker, like you could drink it if you tried. Vines crept. Vines along the rails. No one noticed, or maybe they just didn't care. The guest was singing now, a lazy tune with no words, just a hum that echoed like warm wind through empty amphorae. Now, here's where things got interesting. The captain decided in his infinitely poor wisdom that their guest, so polished, so calm, must be a prince, a rich one, the kind you could ransom. "Let's sell him," he whispered to the first mate. "Good teeth. Pretty voice. Bet the nobles will pay handsomely." But the moment that plan entered the air, something shifted. The sail caught no wind, yet the ship moved faster. The sky didn't darken, but shadows got longer. The hum turned low, like the belly of a drum being slowly pressed. And the grapes, they grew. Right there. Out of the deck planks, fat bunches of grapes bloomed as if the ship itself had decided to become a vineyard. The ropes turned into ivy. The oars became twisted branches. Birds, doves of all things, began circling the mast. And in the centre of it all, the guest no longer looked merely interesting. He looked delighted. He lifted his arms. No effort, no lightning, no loud declarations. Just a shrug, a grin, and a whisper. "I don't like being sold." Then, softly, the pirates began to change. Legs bent, arms flapped, eyes blinked sideways. They fell, one by one, into the sea, shrieking not in pain but in confusion, like men who suddenly forgot how to walk and remembered how to swim at the same time. Dolphins! That's what they became. Not out of malice, not as punishment, but as something more like divine mischief, sideways correction, a gentle, splashy no thank you. All except the helmsman, who had muttered, "Maybe we shouldn't," just once. He remained, still human, still stunned. "Wise men," the god said, placing a grape into the helmsman's palm, "are hard to find. Then, with a twinkle and a vine-bound yawn, Dionysus vanished. And the ship, it kept sailing, alone, quiet, covered in fruit. And as we leave that very confused vessel gently bobbing across the Aegean, with a single mortal steering and a school of newly aquatic ex-pirates leaping joyfully nearby, let your mind wander to calmer tides, to sweeter winds, and rest easy, knowing that sometimes even disaster can ferment into legend. It all started with a tavern. Not a glamorous one, not the kind poets write about or heroes trash during celebratory brawls. Just a squat little building tucked near the port, where fishermen told half-true stories and old women whispered about storms that never came. They served barley soup, bread with olives, and on special days something resembling cheese. Nothing fancy, certainly not imported. But one afternoon, just as the sun drooped like an overripe peach behind the hills, something unusual was added to the menu. Wine. Not just any wine. This one shimmered. It smelled like memories and festivals and slightly questionable decisions, and it was not ordered, not delivered, not poured by hand. It just appeared. The first customer to notice was an old man named Timon, who had once claimed to have wrestled a shark and lost only out of politeness. He lifted his clay cup, squinted inside, and grunted. "That's not what I ordered." The tavern keeper, whose eyebrows moved more than his mouth, walked over. "You didn't order anything." Timon blinked. "Then I better drink it before someone charges me." He sipped, paused, exhaled. Tastes like flute music and springtime disappointment. Word spread. By sunset, every table had at least one cup of the mysterious wine. The odd part, no one ever saw a jug. No one saw it being poured. The wine simply existed calmly, quietly, like it had been invited. That's when Dionysus walked in. Not dramatically, not glowing this time, just a guy in robes slightly too clean for a port tavern. He sat in the corner, ordered nothing, and smiled like he'd seen the punchline to a joke no one had told yet. The tavern keeper, used to drunkards, dreamers, and the occasional disguised god, looked suspicious. "You bring this?" he asked. Dionysus shrugged. "Would you be upset if I had?" "No," the keeper replied. "Just want to know who to thank when people start singing at tables." And they did. A woman who hadn't sung since her wedding hummed a lullaby into her bread. A fisherman with 4 teeth and no rhythm tapped a spoon in perfect time. 2 strangers locked eyes and without speaking began to harmonize a song neither had learned. Even the chairs creaked in time. Let me tell you something, that wine, it didn't just taste good, it remembered. Each sip pulled out the faintest fragments of joy. Your first festival dance, the smell of rain after too many dry weeks, the moment you realized someone liked you back. All of it came back. But not loudly, not in tears, just in warm chestfuls of quiet. The tavern floated in its own music, cups refilling on their own, the floor gently sticky with spilled history, and Dionysus just watched. He didn't need applause, didn't need a toast. He just needed the stillness to shimmer a little. The oddest part? No one got drunk. Not truly. No stumbling, no shouting, just full hearts and blurry smiles. One man walked outside, looked at the moon and said, "I forgive you," though no one knew who you was. A woman gave her dog half a biscuit and whispered, "You deserve better." The wine made people generous with things they didn't know they had. As the night wore down, Dionysus stood, stretched like a cat, and wandered out the back, unnoticed except by the tavern keeper, who finally smiled with both corners of his mouth. The next morning, there was no trace, no jugs, no wine, no music, just empty cups and a floor less sticky than expected. Timon came back, sat down. "Same as yesterday," he said. "You didn't order anything yesterday," said the keeper. Timon nodded. "Then let's hope I don't order again." "And you?" "Maybe tonight there's something soft bubbling beneath the surface, like wine that wasn't on the menu, like a memory you didn't know you wanted to taste again. Let it pour gently across your thoughts. Let it hum in the background like an old lullaby. And if your breath slows just a little, like you're sipping something familiar, that's Dionysus, still serving, still smiling." It began, as most Dionysian disasters do, with a goat. Not a mystical goat. Not a fire-breathing, golden-hoofed, winged beyond reason goat. Just a goat named Melon. Yes, like the fruit. He didn't earn that name. He simply accepted it. Melon had lived behind the shrine near the cliffs for years. Everyone knew him. He was rude. He chewed scrolls, knocked over amphorae, and once bit a senator's sandal just to make a point. The locals swore he had an opinion on everything and voiced it with distinct, pointed bleats. But one afternoon, Melon wandered, farther than usual, past the fig trees, past the sleeping dogs, past the temple grounds where Dionysus had been napping on a cushion of wineskins and scented moss. Now, Dionysus didn't normally care for goats. Too noisy, too judgy. But this one looked him in the eye, unblinking. "Are you judging me?" the god asked. Melon blinked once, then belched. "Fair," said Dionysus, sitting up. "Come, let us ruin something together." And so it began. Dionysus walked through the nearby village with Melon at his heels like a furry, cloven-hoofed advisor. Every time someone tried to greet the god with reverence, Melon headbutted their shins. If someone complimented Dionysus's robe, Melon loudly relieved himself beside them. At first, Dionysus was amused, then intrigued, then somehow inspired. "We need to hold court," he declared, "a proper symposium, with wine and food and poetry that makes no sense until you cry." So a feast was thrown, but not the usual kind. Dionysus gave vague instructions. Make it taste like laughter, but also sadness, and warm bread, but make it cold, and left the villagers to guess. Tables were set with uneven platters, grapes rolled between mismatched bowls, honey dripped onto flatbread that was both stale and somehow fresh. People sat awkwardly on uneven stools, unsure if they should laugh or chew, and in the centre sat Melon, elevated, draped in a purple cloth, staring down at everyone with the judgment of a philosopher king who'd once eaten a scroll of laws and found them bland. Every time a toast was made, Melon bleated loudly. "May the winds be forever in our favour," someone cried. "Blah," said Melon. People began to hesitate, unsure if they should speak, wondering what would earn the goat's approval. A local poet tried a love ode. Melon yawned. A sailor tried a limerick. Melon sneezed. Then a child no older than 7 stood up, held up a fig and said, "This tastes weird, but I like it." Melon nodded once. The room applauded. That was the moment Dionysus declared, "Melon is now High Taster of Truth." A title with no duties, no pay, and endless authority. For days, people came to consult the goat. Should I marry this man? Should I bake more barley cakes? Should I leave this city and become a travelling harpist? Each time, Melon's response, a tilt of the head, a side-eye, or a short bleat, was accepted as divine decree. Dionysus, meanwhile, lounged under a trellis of grapes that grew from nowhere, sipping wine from a shell and composing haikus that made no grammatical sense. Eventually, the villagers grew tired. They missed structure, predictability, meals without goat commentary. And Melon? He wandered off one night quietly, after headbutting a sundial and eating the village record-keeper's sandals. No goodbye, no ceremony. Dionysus awoke the next morning and stretched. "Where's the judge?" he asked. "Gone," came the reply. Dionysus smiled. "That's fair. And you? Maybe there's a little Melon in your life, a voice that cuts through the noise, the one that bleats when things feel too rehearsed, too polite. Let it be with you now, quietly snorting at your worries, rolling its sleepy eyes at your doubts. Not everything needs structure. Sometimes you just need a goat in a robe and a god with a grin to remind you it's okay to wander off once in a while. There was a pirate, because of course there was a pirate in this story, who had a curious condition. He was allergic to logic. His name was Orminos, though most called him Captain Oops, and his ship, which may or may not have floated better upside down, was called the Crusty Laurel. He wasn't the cleverest captain nor the wealthiest, but he had a nose for shiny things and a soft spot for figs, specifically figs that were slightly too ripe and looked like they might reveal secrets if you stared long enough. One morning, just after sunrise, Ormenos found himself on an unfamiliar island. This wasn't unusual. He often woke up places he didn't remember sailing to. It was part of his charm, or his problem, depending on who you asked. The beach was quiet, littered with driftwood shaped like letters from an unknown alphabet and seashells that hummed lullabies when warmed by the sun. And in the centre of the sand sat a single fig, not a tree, not a branch, just one fig, fat, glossy, unattended. Treasure, Ormenos whispered, his one gold earring flickering in agreement. He approached it like a man diffusing a trap, slowly, dramatically, knees bent, arms out, whispering nonsense for protection. By Poseidon's beard and Hera's knitting needles, be real, be ripe, be rare. He picked it up. The fig was warm, soft, fragrant, slightly pulsing, yes, pulsing, and then it giggled. Only once, a tiny hee-hee like a child hiding under a blanket. Captain Ormenos froze, looked around, sniffed the air, bit the fig. That was his second mistake. The fig's flavour changed mid-chew. First it tasted like honeyed almonds, then like sea foam, then like regret, then like his grandmother's stew. And then he remembered things. Not big things, not war or storm, but little things, like the way his brother used to hum while mending nets, or the smell of his first bunk hammock, or the poem someone once carved into the ship's mast and blamed on a ghost. He sat down, the fig's juice dripping down his beard, and he cried, gently, silently, the kind of crying that doesn't need a reason, only a moment. Just then, a voice emerged from the trees, warm, musical, slightly amused. Bit early for emotional fruit, isn't it? Dionysus stepped onto the beach wearing a crown of wild herbs and a robe embroidered with what looked like dancing frogs. You planted this fig? Ormenos asked. Planted? No. Encouraged? Maybe. Why does it remember my childhood? Because you don't, Dionysus said simply. And with that the god plopped down beside the pirate, pulled a second fig from his sleeve. Where had it come from? And began eating with the slow delight of someone savouring both the taste and the effect. More figs appeared, some in baskets, some under rocks, one dangling from a seagull's beak. Each fig had a story. Not all were happy, but all were true. By evening the beach was covered in pirates, some from Ormenos' crew, some who'd arrived on boats drawn by the scent, and some who might have just been fig enthusiasts. They sat, listened, ate, remembered, laughed, cried, snored. And Dionysus? He stood, raised a fig like a goblet and toasted, to the truths we swallow and the memories we chew through slowly. Then, as usual, he disappeared. The next morning Ormenos awoke with sand in his hair, a fig stem behind his ear, and a journal he didn't remember writing in. Every page was filled with stories he swore he'd forgotten. And you? Maybe there's a fig in your memory too. Quiet, waiting, pulsing with something honest. Maybe tonight your dreams will taste like that. Sweet, strange, full of things you didn't know you missed. So bite gently and drift softly. There was once a ship. Not a mighty warship, not a sleek merchant vessel, just a large, slightly confused party barge, named the Indulgence. And yes, that was its real name. Not because it earned it, but because Dionysus painted it himself with wine-soaked brushes, while giggling uncontrollably at his own handwriting. This ship was never meant to travel far. Or at all, really. It was built by mistake. The shipwrights had planned to make a fishing boat. But someone brought too many cushions, someone else misunderstood the measurements, and a third somehow delivered a cask of honeyed wine instead of nails. By the time the hull was done, it had a wine cellar, a harpist nook, and a dance floor. But no oars. The harbour master had frowned. "She'll never sail," he'd said. Dionysus, lounging on a pillow, replied, "Who said anything about sailing? She's here to float and flirt." And so, the Indulgence floated and flirted with the wind, with the moonlight, with the very idea of purpose. People boarded it not to reach a destination, but to forget they ever needed one. There was music, but only at sunset. There was food, but only the kind that required no chewing. Think mashed pomegranates, melted cheeses, grape foam. Let me tell you about the pillows. So many pillows. Embroidered, feather-stuffed, wine-scented. You didn't sit on them, you fell into them like a memory of your favourite nap. And the chandeliers? Made of vines, not crystal, not glass, just flowering vines that glowed faintly and released sleep pollen once every hour. One guest famously fell asleep mid-sentence and woke up 2 days later convinced they'd dreamt their entire adulthood. They went back to art school. No one questioned it. Now, here's the twist. The ship would not leave the harbour. Ever. Not for weather. Not for invitation. Not even when pirates tried to steal it. The anchor wasn't made of metal. It was made of a promise that this ship would stay wherever the party was. And the party was always here. Dionysus himself was both host and guest. He would sometimes appear in the galley, baking olive pastries in an apron that read, "Don't Dionysus me." Other times he'd recline under the stars telling half-true myths about his uncle, who may or may not have invented lightning. And sometimes he just stared into the ocean and whispered, "Let it ferment." On one particular evening, the wind tried its best to move the ship. It huffed, it puffed, it summoned waves that curled like angry cats. But the ship simply shifted slightly, adjusted its cushions, and released a puff of rose-scented mist in return. The storm gave up. Eventually news of the ship spread. People came from distant islands, not for the drinks or the food, but for the quiet. Because the indulgence wasn't a party in the noisy sense. It was a hush party, a celebration of slowing down, of forgetting clocks, of pausing between thoughts and realizing the pause was enough. People read poetry aloud, badly. No one corrected them. One man brought a lyre with one string, played it all night, no one complained. They said it sounded like longing. Coro, the raven, yes, he was here too, refused to perch anywhere except on a tray of pomegranate seeds. Dionysus claimed this meant the bird was evolving. The bird claimed nothing. Then one morning, after 3 years of floating in place, the ship tilted, just slightly, as if hearing something from below. Someone asked, "Is it moving?" "No," someone else replied, "it's swaying to a memory." And maybe it was. It began as most festivals do, with too many garlands, questionable planning, and a cart full of fruit someone insisted was symbolic. The city of Leros had hosted Dionysian celebrations before, usually loud, usually fragrant, occasionally involving goats on stilts, but this one was different. No one quite remembered who called it. There were no invitations, no speeches, no schedule. Just one morning people woke up and there were ribbons hanging from the olive trees, musicians warming up in alleyways, and Dionysus himself sipping from a goblet that seemed to refill every time someone blinked. The first day was lively. Dancing, bread stuffed with cheese and figs. Someone juggled jars. A chorus of untrained singers belted out a love song to fermented honey. On day 2, the dancing slowed. People still smiled, but they began to sit more often. They ate in long, dreamy silences. Even the music softened. Flutes whispered instead of sang. By day 5, no one had gone to work. The market remained closed. Letters sat unposted. One man tried to write his to-do list on a scroll, but the ink turned to wine and the parchment giggled softly before curling up like a cat and falling asleep. Let me tell you, the strangest part wasn't that the festival continued. It was that no one wanted it to stop. Each day a new kind of food appeared. Grape pies, honeyed chestnuts, bread that tasted like toasted lullabies. Where did it come from? No one knew. Some said Dionysus was baking in the moonlight. Others claimed the olive trees had become sentient chefs. Either way, no one questioned it. And then came the dreams. People began waking up remembering things they hadn't dreamed yet. One woman woke laughing about a play she swore she hadn't watched. A boy described a song he heard in a nap that hadn't happened. A man claimed he'd spoken to a fig that told him a secret about the stars. Dionysus only smiled. "You finally unwrapped time," he said, as if it were a gift that had been waiting under a cushion all along. By week 2, clothes had loosened. Shoes were optional. The concept of Wednesday dissolved into a warm breeze. One baker used to time his bread by the sun. Now he waited until the dough sighed. Even Coro, perched on a crooked beam above the main square, stopped correcting people's grammar and simply cooed contentedly into his feathers. Then, on the 21st day, or was it the 30th, a visitor arrived. A merchant from a neighbouring island carrying bolts of cloth and a list of deliverers. He stepped into the city, looked around and blinked. "Why is no one working?" he asked. Someone handed him a peach tart. He chewed. He stayed. Dionysus once explained it like this. The world spins fast enough on its own. This festival, it's not about escape, it's about release. And release they did. Eventually, of course, the city returned to normal, sort of. The ribbons were never taken down. The olives kept singing quietly, and once a month someone found a pastry on their windowsill, still warm. But no one ever called it ending. It simply shifted, folded itself into the city's bones, like a secret nap between conversations, like a laugh that echoes after the joke is forgotten. And you? Maybe tonight is your festival. Maybe sleep is your ribbon. Maybe the food in your dream will taste like something you once loved and forgot. Let the music slow. Let your breath match the hush of unseen flutes. You've unwrapped enough time for one day. There was a time, though no one marked it on any calendar, when Dionysus decided that music had become too polite, too measured, too aware of rhythm and scale and how not to frighten goats. He wanted something different, something a little off-key, a little strange. So he wandered into the hills one morning barefoot and humming in search of something to unpolish the polished. He found it tucked inside the hollow of a gnarled olive tree, an old flute made of faded reed and tied with a bit of blue string. It was dusty, cracked, and humming softly to itself. Not a song, just a murmur, like it had opinions but didn't trust anyone enough to speak up. Naturally, Dionysus picked it up, turned it over, gave it a sniff and asked, "Well, you got anything to say?" The flute shuddered slightly. Then just once it whispered, "Only the truth." Now this intrigued Dionysus, because while he loved a good lie, especially the kind baked into myths and gossip and dramatic entrances, he also respected a truth that didn't try too hard. And this flute, it felt like the kind of truth that sneaks up on you while you're brushing your hair or tying your sandals. He brought it back to the city, slung across his back like a lazy sword, and every now and then he'd blow into it gently. Not hard, just a puff. Enough to let it decide whether or not it wanted to speak. At first, it didn't. But eventually, during a particularly slow evening where everyone was too full of honey cakes to move, Dionysus raised it to his lips, breathed in, and the flute whispered, "She only bakes for people she misses." Everyone turned. It was true. The baker's daughter had spent 3 days baking fig loaves, and no one had known why. The next day, another whisper. He keeps 2 olives in his pocket for courage. People gasped. One man blushed. Another wept quietly into a mug of pine wine. Soon, the flute became the unofficial oracle of small embarrassments and beautiful secrets. But only the soft kind. Only the kind that made you feel more human, not less. It never shouted. It never judged. It just whispered. A woman heard, "You laugh like your grandmother did, and it keeps her near." A boy heard, "You're kinder than you think, especially when you're tired." Even Coro the Raven got a whisper. You pretend to be annoyed, but you like them. No one knew exactly how the flute worked. Some believed it read your breath. Others thought it tasted guilt like salt on the air. One theory claimed it only spoke when it knew the listener was ready to hear what they already suspected. Dionysus never claimed to control it. In fact, he often looked surprised by what it said, but he never looked disappointed. One day, a stranger arrived, a merchant, skeptical and impatient. He snatched the flute, blew hard and barked, "What's my truth then?" The flute squeaked, once, then fell silent. "You broke it," he shouted. "No," said Dionysus, taking it back. "You were too loud for it." And that became the lesson. The flute spoke when spoken to gently, like truth often does. Eventually Dionysus tied it to the limb of a fig tree just outside the city, where the wind could play it when no one was listening. And sometimes, late at night, a breeze would carry one of its truths across the rooftops. She thinks of you when the sky smells like rain. You're not a burden, just a tired miracle. You haven't been forgotten. And you? Maybe you don't need a magical flute tonight. Maybe your own breath carries soft truths already. Maybe they've been waiting, quiet and patient, for the noise in your mind to hush. Let it hush now. Let your breath be gentle. Let your thoughts become a breeze. And maybe, just maybe, you'll hear what the silence has been trying to say all along. Long ago, though not quite long enough for anyone to forget, a potter named Helixos crafted what he believed would be his final masterpiece. A wine jug, big, round, painted with swirls that reminded people of laughter they didn't mean to make. He called it his goodbye jug, because after this one, he planned to retire, move to the hills, and talk to olives like they were family. The jug had other plans. It wasn't magical at first. Not obviously. It held wine like a jug should. It didn't leak, didn't wobble, didn't complain, until Dionysus saw it. He had wandered into Helixos' shop pretending to browse. Really, he was looking for a snack, but instead he found the jug sitting quietly on a shelf. "This one," Dionysus said, pointing. "It has opinions." Helixos squinted. "It's a jug. And yet it judges me." Dionysus bought the jug, not with coin, with a promise. "I'll fill it with something it's never held before." Back in his ivy-wrapped villa, Dionysus poured wine into it. Nothing happened. Then he sang to it. The jug trembled. Not a lot. Just enough to make the wine inside ripple. The next morning the jug was still full, despite half the city visiting for drinks. "Maybe I poured more than I thought," he muttered. The next night, still full. By the fourth day it was overflowing. Dionysus whispered, "Are you showing off?" The jug didn't reply, so he named it Epithios, the never thirsty. And word spread. People came from all over to sip from the bottomless jug, not because they needed wine, but because each sip tasted slightly different. One man swore he tasted peaches. Another claimed it reminded him of his mother's lullabies. One very serious philosopher said, "This wine has memory," then burst into tears. Epithios became more than a jug. It became a mood. But here's the funny part. It wouldn't pour for everyone. If you tried too hard, demanded too much, or made a speech about deserving a drink, the wine would stop. People learned to approach with softness, with humility, with a quiet sense of curiosity. Eventually they started talking to the jug, not to be silly, but because it listened. One girl whispered, "I'm afraid I'm too much." The jug glowed, warm, gold, subtle. One old sailor muttered, "I wish I'd told her I loved her." The jug tilted forward gently and gave him a sip that tasted like closure. Even Koro, ever skeptical, landed beside it one day, cawed once and received a single glistening drop. "Cheeky jug," he said. Dionysus treated Epithios like a sibling, not a servant. Sometimes they sat in silence together at dusk. No wine, no talking, just the comfort of being full beside someone who once felt empty. Eventually someone asked the question, "Why doesn't it run out?" Dionysus smiled, "Because it remembers what it feels like to be needed." And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the jug stayed full because people finally treated it like more than a container. And maybe you, tonight, have felt like a jug, poured into, leaned on, expected to never run dry. But hear this, even Epithios was allowed to rest, to be still, to simply sit in the quiet full of unspoken things. Let that be you now. Let yourself be the jug, not to serve, but to hold, to keep warm, to wait, full of something no one else needs to name. His name was Siphos, though most just called him Shoes Off, because he never wore any unless it was a wedding or a thunderstorm. As a satyr, he was expected to leap, sing, drink, and occasionally headbutt fruit baskets out of trees for sport. But Siphos, he was different. He still danced, yes, but more like a gentle tumble than a wild fling. His flute playing was slow, often half-finished, as if he forgot the ending on purpose. And he had a habit, very unusual among satyrs, of staring at clouds and whispering, "I wish I knew what you were thinking." One afternoon, after a festival where everyone else had passed out in grape-stained exhaustion, Siphos found himself wide awake, not energized, not restless, just quietly humming inside, like something needed out. So he picked up a piece of parchment, then another, and another, sat cross-legged under a fig tree and began to write. It wasn't grand. It didn't rhyme. It didn't even make much sense. But the words came anyway, gentle and slow. Today I danced with a shadow, and it did not mind that I missed a step. He paused, blinked, smiled to himself, and then wrote, bread tastes different when no one watches, and wine that spills on a friend is not wasted. One line at a time, like pebbles dropped in a calm river. By moonrise he had a stack of them, dozens, some just 4 words long, some scribbled sideways, some blotted with grape juice or the imprint of a sleeping squirrel's foot. He didn't show anyone. Instead, he rolled them into scrolls and tucked them in odd places. One in a tree knot, one inside a sandal, one folded into a flower crown. Dionysus found the first one 2 days later. It read, I do not want applause, just permission to be quiet. The god stopped, stared at it, sat down. I've never been quiet, he whispered to the fig leaves. From then on, the scrolls began to appear like whispers around the city. On a bakery shelf, crumbs are proof that something was good. Tied to a donkey's ear, he only complains because he listens too hard. Hidden in a harp string, even silence can hum. People started collecting them. Not hoarding, just holding. Reading them before naps, tucking them into pillows. One woman swore reading 3 in a row helped her sleep better than lavender tea. But Sisyphus didn't stop writing. He wrote even when the wind stole his ink, even when birds nested in his curls, even when a child asked, why don't you do flips like the other satyrs? And he simply replied, because some joy is quiet. And here's the thing, he always fell asleep mid-sentence, no matter how early he started or how determined he felt. By the last line, his head would nod, his hand would trail off, and he'd curl up in the grass like a poem unfinished. Dionysus called it sleep writing. One time a scroll simply read, today I... and that was it. But it was enough. People began writing their own. They didn't try to be poetic, just honest. I miss the smell of my grandmother's porch. I sometimes like rain because it cancels plans I was afraid to cancel myself. I want to be hugged without being asked why. They tied them to trees, to each other, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, sleepy thoughts are sacred. And you? Maybe you too are a poet and don't know it. Maybe your yawn is a sonnet, your sigh a stanza, your dream tonight? A verse still writing itself. Don't rush to finish. Let the sentence trail off. Let the scroll stay open. Let your breath become punctuation. And sleep. The final line you don't need to write. It began with hunger. Not the roaring, dramatic kind. Just a quiet itch behind the ribs. Dionysus sat under a tree. Fig? Olive? No one could remember. Sipping something that may or may not have been made of melted dreams, when his stomach sighed. Not growled, sighed. Oh no, he whispered, I've entered the snacking hour. Usually this would mean grapes, or honeyed cheese, or dates soaked in someone's forgotten wine. But this time, he wanted something new. Something that didn't exist yet. Something that could only be described with a long pause and a gentle head tilt. So he set to work. First, a loaf of barley bread. Stale, just enough to have personality. Second, a smear of goat cheese, slightly too sour, the kind that makes you sneeze softly. Then, pomegranate seeds, for crunch and metaphor. Topped with a drizzle of sweet olive oil that shimmered like gossip at a garden party. And then, the secret. Crushed rose petals, a dash of salt stolen from a tear, and a whisper of time that had grown under a sleeping harpist's pillow. He stacked it all together, took a bite, chewed slowly. His face twisted, paused, smiled. It tastes like an apology wrapped in a picnic. Naturally, he wanted someone to experience it, and who better than the Oracle of Delphos, the wisest, dreamiest, most perpetually mysterious woman east of Olympus. He wrapped the snack in fig leaves, tied it with grapevine thread, and placed it on a silver tray that moaned slightly when touched. But that's another story. When the oracle received it, she stared at it for a long time. Not suspiciously, just thoughtfully, as if trying to remember a dream that had ended just before the best part. She took a bite. The birds nearby went silent. A cat fainted. The wind stopped blowing just for a second. She blinked, then blinked again, then whispered, "What did I just taste?" Her assistant, a very nervous man named Loxo, leaned in. "Well," he whispered, "what do you see?" The oracle opened her mouth, then closed it, then slowly said, I see. A goat in a sweater, dancing with my grandmother at a wedding that hasn't happened yet." Loxo gasped. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," she said. Then she took another bite. From that moment on, her visions got stranger. No more wars, no more plagues. Instead, beware the man with too many spoons. Someone will forget your birthday, but they mean well. A lost sandal will bring you peace. People were confused, then delighted, then confused again. One man travelled 400 miles to ask the oracle about his business. She handed him a beet and whispered, "Slice it crosswise, you'll understand." He did. He claimed it saved his marriage. Dionysus, of course, was thrilled. He made more. Never the same way twice. Sometimes sweet, sometimes confusing. Once entirely made of pickled pears and poetry crumbs. He called them snacrifices. People began leaving ingredients on their doorsteps in hopes he'd visit. Someone wrote a poem to a bread crust. Another painted a cheese wheel with tiny mythological scenes. One boy whispered his dreams into a jar of thyme every night, and sometimes, just sometimes, the next morning, they'd find something strange and delicious waiting. The oracle eventually started writing again. Not prophecies, recipes, each one weirder than the last. Grilled laughter with side of memory, soup of almost kisses, and you? Maybe tonight there's a flavour drifting through your thoughts too. Unnameable, familiar, soft on the edges. Let it melt. Let it swirl around like honey and tea. Let your dreams snack on metaphors. And may your sleep be full of things that taste like forgiveness. It started, oddly enough, with a whisper. A young priest, barely old enough to grow regret, knelt at a seaside altar carved from driftwood and old coral and prayed, "May the gods send peace to my dreams." But the tide was loud that evening, the wind fussy, and Dionysus, relaxing nearby in a hammock made of kelp and questionable decisions, misheard it. He blinked, raised a seaweed-wrapped eyebrow and muttered, "Did he say, 'Please send a dream to the sea'?" Now, Dionysus, being who he is, took that as an invitation, and what better way to send dreams into the sea than to throw a party? Soft one, sleepy one, a sleepover. He summoned pillows, big plush ones that never dried properly but somehow never moulded either. He invited guests, not the usual Olympian crowd, they snored too competitively. No, he invited sea monsters, but not the terrifying sailor-chomping kind. These were off-duty sea monsters, ones that wore scarves and collected pebbles. One named Glorblatt liked embroidery. Another, Marifex, had a shell collection so vast it required 3 interns and a labelling system. They arrived in ripples, poking their tentacles and tails above the foam like curious children. One brought marshmallows, another brought kelp chips no one liked but everyone politely chewed. The priest meanwhile fell asleep under the stars, unaware of the divine mix-up just offshore. On a floating platform stitched from seaweed and stubbornness, the monsters gathered. Dionysus laid out blankets made from moonlight and deep-sea moss. Candles were lit, bioluminescent squids actually, trained to glow on cue, and thus the sleepover began. First came story time. Glorblatt, with her 12 soft eyes and sleepy voice, told tales of ancient shipwrecks where the treasure wasn't gold but forgotten lullabies. She hummed one that made the tide pause just to listen. Then there were snacks, seafoam cookies, drowsy barnacle brittle, a slush made from the melted sighs of lonely sailors. One monster passed around a jar of sleep bubbles. You didn't eat them, just held them and felt your eyelids get heavier. Then came games, but not competitive ones, gentle games. Who Can Lie Stillest was popular, Name That Cloud was tricky, underwater, and of course the classic, What's That Dream About?, where everyone took turns guessing what someone was dreaming just by looking at their earlobes. No one won, that was the point. Even Koro showed up. Late as usual, he perched on a kelp hammock and muttered, "This is absurd," then fell asleep mid-eye roll. Somewhere between the final snack and the first real snore, Dionysus stood, stretched, and whispered to the sea, "Carry this to him." And the priest, still curled on the shore, stirred. He dreamed of floating, of soft creatures humming lullabies, of laughter that sounded like bubbles rising. When he awoke, there was sea foam in his hair and a small note pinned to his robe. It read, "Next time, wish louder." He never told anyone what he'd seen, but every night after he left a blanket and a seashell by the waves, just in case. And you? Maybe you too have misheard something once, turned stress into a nap or worry into a snack. Maybe your own sleepover is happening right now, with dreams creeping in like gentle sea monsters offering cookies and calm. Let them in. Let your tide soften. Let the waves forget what they were chasing. You're allowed to rest now. It began innocently. Dionysus was tired. Not party tired, not "I've danced too much and lost a sandal" tired, just soul tired. He lay beneath a fig tree, sun dripping lazily through the leaves, and whispered, "I need a better pillow." Now, most gods would summon a cloud, or enchant a goat. Dionysus? He walked into the market, hair tousled, tunic wrinkled, and began testing every pillow he could find. He laid his head on a wheat-stuffed one. Too crunchy. Tried one filled with olive pits. Too judgmental. Finally, a quiet old woman offered him a cushion made of layered goose feathers, thyme-scented linen, and something she called the memory of afternoon naps. He sank into it, exhaled, whispered, "Oh," and fell asleep. Right there, in the market, on the ground, hugging the pillow like it had forgiven him for every wrong decision he never made. People gathered. At first they watched, then they sat. Then they asked the old woman, "Do you sell more?" She did not. She made one pillow a month, only when she felt the right yawn brewing. The next day Dionysus returned. He bought the pillow, named it Palon, and began taking it everywhere, to festivals, to rituals, to diplomatic meetings. He never explained it, just carried it like a sacred object. When people asked why, he'd say, "It knows." Soon, whispers began, "That's the nap pillow. He only listens to those who've napped recently. If you hold it, your worries soften." One man touched it briefly and immediately apologized to his ex. Another woman leaned on it for 3 seconds and decided to forgive herself for something she'd carried for years. It wasn't magic. It was just soft. But softness, in a world that prized noise, felt holy. People began crafting their own, not replicas, no one dared that, but personal pillows stuffed with lavender, with stories, with childhood shirt scraps. They met at dusk under sleepy trees and talked about softness, about gentleness, about the radical courage it takes to rest. Dionysus didn't lead them. He just napped nearby. They didn't call it a cult. Not really. But there were robes, and matching eye masks, and an official greeting, a yawn followed by a slow nod. Their first and only rule: you don't have to earn your rest. Soon, cities took notice. Productivity dropped, smiles increased. One city outlawed naps. The next week their fountains dried up and all their spoons disappeared. No one blamed the pillows. But also, no one didn't. Eventually temples requested Palin's presence. Dionysus obliged, laying it on altars with ceremony. But he'd whisper each time, "Don't worship the pillow, worship the pause." Palin never spoke, but once someone swore they heard it sigh in approval. And you? Maybe tonight your bed is your temple, your pillow a quiet priest. Maybe you too need to remember. You don't have to earn your sleep. You don't need to finish that list, win that thought, solve that ache. You just need to lie back, close your eyes, and let softness win. His name was Telos. He wasn't a remarkable goat by mythical standards. He didn't glow, he didn't talk. He once ate an entire poem and hiccuped in iambic pentameter for a week. But that's not why people remembered him. They remembered Telos because of the blanket. It began on a chilly morning. Dionysus had wrapped Telos in a spare bit of cloth. Nothing fancy. Just a cotton wrap the colour of mashed dates. He said, "Don't catch a chill, old friend," and left the goat nestled near a fig crate, softly chewing and blinking into the rising sun. Someone walked by, froze, whispered, Oh my gods, the layering! By noon, 3 people had mimicked it. They called it pastoral drape. One added olive leaf accents. Another tied the knot off centre and muttered something about goat core minimalism. Telos, for his part, didn't care. He was warm. That was enough. But the city noticed. Soon, robes got looser. Fabric got softer. Sandals were swapped for fuzzy socks with zero historical accuracy. Capes were left behind. Cloaks turned to shawls. Someone invented nap-friendly togas. Dionysus returned from a wine-tasting/cloud-watching retreat 3 days later to find half the city dressed like bedtime had become law. What happened? He asked. Telos, they said. He looked at the goat, still wrapped, now lounging on a pillow pile and gently gnawing a plum. Well, Dionysus whispered, he does pull it off. And thus began the age of cozy. Tailors adapted. Instead of armour and ceremonial garb, they began crafting garments that invited naps mid-conversation. Sleeves, optional, blanket capes, standard. One designer created a tunic that transformed into a hammock. Another, a scarf that hummed lullabies when crumpled just right. People no longer asked, "What are you wearing?" but rather, "How well can you sleep in that?" Philosophers debated whether comfort was a virtue. Poets rhymed linen with beginning and felt proud. Even the city guards wore plush vests with satin linings and took shifts in designated nap zones. Telos, he began appearing at public events, always wrapped just slightly differently. At one harvest parade, he wore a toga of patchwork dreams, stitched together from scraps people claimed carried their best naps. He didn't walk, he glided. Probably because someone slid a small platform under him. No one cared. Fashion houses began consulting him. He'd stare at fabric samples, chew once, then turn away. Rejected, they'd whisper in awe. Children began dressing their pets in miniature shawls. A bakery launched a Telos tart stuffed with sleep herbs and served with a spoon carved from figwood. Dionysus once said, "Only in my domain can a goat in a blanket become a god of comfort," and no one disagreed. Because in a world obsessed with grandeur, Telos reminded everyone that rest can be radiant, that comfort can be couture, that maybe, just maybe, your best outfit is the one you can nap in without explanation. And you? Tonight, maybe forget the stiffness, the zipped, the tucked, the too tight. Let your skin breathe and let your blanket hug. Let your dreams strut gently down a sleepy runway, wearing the softest thing your soul has ever slipped into. Dionysus had seen it all. He'd watched rivers turn into wine, grapes grow in the dark, and mortals declare eternal loyalty after just one glass of apricot mead. But nothing had ever made him wait until he met Lento. Lento was a snail, not a talking snail, not a glowing snail, just a small, slow, undramatic little swirl with eyes on stalks and a pace best described as maybe tomorrow. He found Lento curled on the rim of a forgotten goblet, slowly inspecting a leftover drop of pomegranate wine as though it might contain the secrets of the universe. Dionysus was enchanted. "Ah," he whispered, crouching, "a creature of true savour." The snail blinked. Maybe. It was hard to tell. So, naturally, Dionysus built a tasting tray, a long slab of polished olive wood, upon which he poured micro sips of his finest vintages, one by one, each no larger than a dewdrop. He invited Lento. The snail arrived 27 minutes later and sniffed. That's all. Just sniffed. Dionysus waited. Another blink, a pause, then a tiny tongue flick, then movement. So slow that moss growing nearby rolled its eyes. But when the snail reached the first drop, aged fig wine infused with thyme and something Dionysus called ambition tears, he did something remarkable. He stopped, half a breath before touching the liquid, then leaned in, then sighed. Dionysus blinked. "You appreciated the scent?" No answer, because Lento had not yet tasted. He had only considered tasting, and thus began the longest wine tasting in recorded history. The snail moved from one sip to the next. Hours passed. Birds flew overhead, took naps, woke, flew again. Dionysus didn't move. He was hypnotized. Each time Lento approached a new drop, he paused, reflected, tilted his shell, left behind a spiral-shaped trail that looked oddly like punctuation marks. On the 6th drop, Dionysus whispered, "This one has notes of oak and regret." The snail did not agree. At least, his lack of speed suggested disagreement. On the 9th, Lento paused so long that Dionysus built a small bench, and sat, and thought, and for the first time in centuries just breathed. The world slowed. The sun moved in inches. The breeze stopped trying to be clever. At one point, a visitor approached. "Is that a snail?" "Yes." "What's it doing?" "Reminding me," Dionysus said softly, "that not everything must be devoured." Eventually Lento finished. He looked up, or maybe just slightly to the left, and Dionysus bowed. "You are," he said, "the slowest and wisest sommelier I have ever met." Lento blinked, once, then began his return journey. It took a day, but during that time Dionysus made no new wine, held no revelry. He simply sat, surrounded by tiny sips and silent wisdom. When Lento finally reached the edge of the tray, Dionysus gave him a tiny pillow. The snail slept on it for 3 days. People still speak of the time the god of wine was taught patience by a being with no rush and no hurry. A temple was erected, not to Dionysus but to Lento. Inside it, a single drop of wine replaced daily, and a plaque that read, "Taste slowly, live softly." And you? Maybe tonight is not for rushing, not for solving or scaling. Maybe it's for one slow breath, one tiny moment of not yet, one dream that unfolds at the pace of a snail crossing satin. Let it come, let it take its time, and let yourself sip the silence. There's a time just before the sky exhales, when even the gods feel a hush creep in. Dionysus felt it one such dusk. Not the loud dusk, not the golden, dramatic kind, but the kind that smells like warm stone and fading lavender. He sat by the window of his quietest villa, the one lined with blankets no one folded, and windows that always knew when to fog, and whispered to himself, "Maybe I should write a lullaby." Not for fame, not for magic, just for the feeling, a soft song, a hum for the weary, a melody for pillows. He lit a candle that flickered like it knew secrets, dipped his quill into a pot of ink made from blueberry skin and old sighs, and began, "Hush now, stars are stirring slow." "Good," he smiled, then added, "Like honey melting in warm dough." He paused. "Wait, that wasn't a metaphor. That sounded delicious." He shook his head, started again. "Lay down your thoughts, let the world dim." "Nice. Like olives resting in lemon skin." He blinked, sighed. "Am I hungry?" "Probably." He tried a third time. "Close your eyes, the sky shall steep." "Beautiful. Like figs in syrup before they sleep." "Oh, come on." It was happening, and every verse, every rhymed couplet somehow turned into a snack. A pastry, a cheese pairing, a poetic tasting menu. He gave up rhyming and just wrote down what came to mind. Drizzle honey on fresh thyme toast and whisper to it like a shy lover. He read it aloud. It did not help him sleep, but it did make him hungry. Still, he couldn't stop. He was trying to write a lullaby. He really was. But what emerged instead was a soft scroll of edible dreams, a stew for the soul, a croissant for the conscience, a cheese that reminded people of their grandmother's garden. He called it accidentally the Lullaby Kitchen. People found the scroll. Of course they did. They made the recipes. Of course they did, and somehow it worked. Not as music, but as sleep. One bite of the nap tart, stuffed with plum and rosemary mist, and people yawned mid-chew. A sip of doze syrup, boiled from almond milk, nutmeg, and a laugh you forgot you laughed. Eyes fluttered. Even the sleepy bread made from flour, dates, and pureed bedtime stories caused an entire amphitheatre to nap mid-performance. The lullaby never got written. Not fully, but every dish was a verse, every flavour a hum. Cora the Raven tried the snore crisp and mumbled, "It's too effective," before snuggling into a basket of linen. Eventually Dionysus leaned back and smiled. Maybe lullabies don't always need notes, he mused. Maybe they just need nutmeg. He opened a new scroll, titled it Pillow Recipes, then fell asleep with butter on his cheek. And you? Maybe tonight your dreams are hungry, not for chaos, not for clutter, but for quiet bites of rest. Let yourself taste stillness. Let your breath simmer. Let your thoughts steep like herbs under moonlight. No lyrics needed, just softness, just flavour, just sleep. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sky forgets to brighten and the breeze wears socks. Dionysus wandered through a field of dandelions, each one whispering secrets they'd overheard from butterflies. He wasn't searching for anything, not really, just drifting. Then he tripped over a turtle, gently, gracefully, almost poetically. "Who puts a rock in the middle of a meadow?" Dionysus muttered. The turtle blinked, slowly, twice, then said, though not out loud, not exactly, "I've been here longer than the meadow." Dionysus tilted his head. "Are you mystical?" "No," said the turtle, "just consistent." And that was the start of it. Dionysus sat down, not out of awe, just comfort. The turtle didn't move, just stared. So Dionysus talked, about the noise, about the revelry, about the running from silence. The turtle listened like it had nowhere better to be. Which, of course, it didn't. And as the god poured his thoughts like wine into the grass, the turtle finally said something that changed everything. "You move fast," Dionysus raised an eyebrow. "That's the point." "Why?" The god blinked, then shrugged, then frowned. He hadn't been asked that in ever. And so, the turtle began coaching him. Not through lectures, through being. Every day Dionysus would visit, the turtle would nap. Dionysus would ask, "Is this the lesson?" The turtle would reply, eventually, "It could be." He learned to breathe between questions, to sit without solving, to chew grapes one at a time. He learned that stillness isn't laziness, it's listening. That boredom is just a doorway mislabeled. Once, Dionysus offered the turtle a pillow. The turtle refused, said, "I carry mine always." Dionysus was stunned. "Shell as metaphor," he whispered. "I love it." The turtle slowly chewed a petal and said, "It's not a metaphor, it's a shell." One afternoon the turtle said, "Let's walk." It took them 7 hours to cross a single field. By the end, Dionysus had counted his breaths, noted cloud patterns, listened to the rhythm of a bee's wings, forgiven someone. When they reached the other side, the turtle said, "That was fast." Dionysus almost cried. Eventually people noticed the change. He laughed softer, drank slower. He gave gifts that couldn't be unwrapped, like silence or time. He told revelers, the real party starts when the music stops. He wore softer shoes, and once a week he sat beside a pond, beside a turtle, and said nothing. The cults called the turtle the still coach. They built a shrine, a single smooth stone with a cushion on top. No prayers allowed, just naps, no offerings, just pauses. Koro visited once, sat beside the turtle. After an hour he said, "You're either very wise or just too tired to care." The turtle said, "Yes. And you? Maybe tonight you're walking too fast in your thoughts. Maybe your mind's trying to outrun stillness. Let this be your field. Let your breath be slow. Let your heart be a turtle. Quiet, steady, carrying softness on its back. No rush, no arrival, just here, just now, just rest." Chapter 17. His name was Nilos, son of a river god and a mortal stargazer, born during an eclipse raised by riddles and cursed with eternal awareness. He couldn't sleep. Not in the dramatic, wide-eyed curse by the fates kind of way. Just never quite made it to dreams. He'd close his eyes, lie very still, wait, and nothing, and not even those weird half-dreams where you're falling or showing up to a banquet with only one sandal, just a quiet buzz behind the eyelids. Like his brain was a tavern that never closed. He tried everything, sleep herbs, chants from forest witches, counting fish, counting boats, counting all the goats Dionysus ever borrowed and forgot to return. Nothing worked. Until one night, desperate and oddly well moisturized from a failed potion soak, he showed up at Dionysus's doorstep. "I heard you know about rest," he said. Dionysus looked up from a nap he hadn't planned to take and blinked. "I know how to lose a day and find it again." "I want to sleep," said Nilos, "just once." Dionysus offered him tea. It tasted like almond skin and lavender clouds. Nilos remained awake, so Dionysus did something radical. He didn't try to help, he just sat with him, in silence. Then he handed Nilos a pillow. Soft, unassuming, smelled faintly of starlight and old lullabies. Still no sleep, then a blanket. Heavy, like a hug you forgot you needed. Still nothing. Finally Dionysus whispered, "What if you're not meant to dream?" Nilos froze. "That's cruel." "Or," Dionysus said gently, "what if your rest doesn't need decoration?" The demigod blinked. "What if," the god continued, "you could lie down and just stop, not fly, not fall, not float, just stop." Not a journey, not a story, just stillness. Nilos stared at the wall for a while, very soft wall, made of woven moss and dried fig threads. Then he lay down. They said nothing. No music, no humming, just the sound of breathing and a night too polite to interrupt. And eventually, he didn't sleep. Not exactly. But something happened. His thoughts stopped asking questions. His chest stopped auditioning for a thunderstorm. It became blank, but not empty. Just undisturbed. And that was enough. When he opened his eyes hours later, there was no memory, no strange visions, no symbolic goats. But he felt rested, like something had finally let go. "Is this sleep?" he asked. Dionysus smiled. "It's the version that fits you." After that, Nilos came back often. Not to dream, just to not. He called it the pause. And it caught on. Some people didn't want stories in their sleep. Didn't want metaphors or symbols or soft unicorns with regret issues. They wanted stillness, a blank slate, a cool breeze on the inside of their thoughts. Temples began offering dreamless rooms. No incense, no chanting, just soft mats, dim lights, silence that didn't expect applause. Even the oracle visited once. She left, saying, "That was the first time I wasn't anyone." Dionysus never tried to define it. He just kept the tea warm and let people stay as long as they needed. And you? Maybe you're not here to dream, not tonight. Maybe you don't need floating gardens or symbolic goats. Maybe you just need this, stillness, weightless quiet, a breath that doesn't ask questions. You don't need to journey, just pause, and let your thoughts forget they were ever in motion. It began, as many great things do, with a sock. A single soft, slightly crumpled sock, stranded on a bench outside Dionysus's vineyard, pale green, worn at the heel, still warm, as if someone had just napped in it and floated away without a backward glance. He picked it up, sniffed, smelled like sunlight on linen, and memories. Not dramatic ones, not epic tales, just nap memories. The kind where you curl up on the floor because the couch feels too ambitious. Where a breeze makes you close your eyes just for 5 minutes and the world disappears. He held it gently. "Someone loved this nap," he whispered. So he kept it, placed it on a pillow, wrote a tiny tag. Owner unknown, dream probably about soup. And thus began the memory museum. No walls, just a courtyard shaded by sleepy olive trees. Each item displayed on a soft cushion under the softest light you've never quite seen. There was a teacup with one cold sip left and a lipstick print shaped like a sigh. A scarf still smelling of a sleepy lover who once whispered a joke and fell asleep before the punchline. A book open to page 47 where the reader stopped mid-sentence and never looked back. A plush mushroom toy with one sleepy button eye. A piece of toast, uneaten, that someone made before they decided to nap instead. Each artifact came with a card, not a story, just a guess. Last worn during a thunderstorm that sounded like applause. Left behind in a hammock argument with gravity. May have contained a dream about a bakery that floats. Visitors came, quietly. They didn't talk much. They wandered, sat on the padded floor, hugged things they didn't own, wept sometimes, but softly, like they were apologizing to their own exhaustion. One child hugged the scarf and fell asleep instantly. A teenager picked up the half-eaten cookie and remembered the first time someone kissed their forehead without needing a reason. A crow stole a bracelet and returned it 2 days later with a note that read, "Sorry, needed it." Dionysus didn't ask for donations, but they came anyway. One day a basket of mismatched socks appeared, each tagged with a tiny doodle of a yawn. Another day someone left a pillow with the imprint of their grandmother's hand still pressed into the fabric. The most powerful artifact. A simple folded napkin with nothing on it. Just the crease. And yet, it made people blink twice and breathe a little slower. Even Koro visited. He left behind a shiny button, grumbled "don't ask," and perched atop the scarf for 2 hours. The museum grew, without noise, without walls. Some said it wasn't even in one place anymore. That sometimes you could feel it around you. When you hold a mug and forget to drink. When your jacket smells like a dream you forgot to have. When your blanket folds itself just a little, as if remembering the shape of your back. Dionysus never charged admission. He only said, if you leave something behind, make it gentle. And you? Maybe you've lost a sock or a moment or a piece of quiet once tucked in your pocket. Let this chapter be your museum. Let these words be the bench you left something on. And maybe tonight, as you drift into that old familiar softness, you'll find it again. Waiting, exactly where you forgot it. It was wedged between 2 rocks, a flute, cracked down the middle, its reed chipped and its breath hole filled with dust and forgetfulness. And Dionysus wasn't looking for it. He'd simply bent to pick up a fallen grape when his hand brushed against the cold wood, and he paused, lifting it with the tenderness reserved for forgotten things, blowing once, then twice, and hearing nothing but the hush of his own breath folding into itself. And instead of frustration, he smiled, for there was something oddly peaceful in the way this flute didn't perform, didn't strive, didn't scream to be noticed, and so he carried it, calling it whisper, playing it every morning not to make music but to exhale, and people began to notice that even in its silence it said something, for birds gathered near, not disturbed, just listening, and villagers walked by and slowed their steps without knowing why. And one woman touched the flute and wept gently, saying it reminded her of a hug she almost remembered, and though the flute made no sound, it offered something rare, presence without pressure, melody without noise, and slowly others brought their own broken things, a lyre missing strings, a harp with a warped frame, a tambourine with no jingles, and they formed a quiet band whose concerts were held in empty amphitheatres at dusk where people sat, not to hear, but to feel, to rest in the permission that maybe not everything needed to be loud or perfect or even functional. And Dionysus never fixed the flute because some things aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be respected as they are, as reminders that silence can be sacred and breath can be beautiful, even without a tune. And maybe tonight, dear listener, your thoughts too can rest, not trying to be brilliant or poetic or productive, but simply being, like the hush of a flute that forgot how to sing and in doing so taught everyone else how to stop. Dionysus had never run a cafe before, but when he stumbled upon an abandoned olive oil shop at the sleepy edge of a seaside village, where even the waves yawned and the breeze smelled like roasted almonds and freshly forgotten to-do lists, he stood in the doorway, blinked at the dust, and said aloud to no one, "This is where naps should be poured." So he swept the floor with a vine branch, lit a candle that smelled like bedtime cinnamon, fluffed a single velvet pillow in the center of the room, and hung a sign above the door that read, "Nap Cafe, order in whispers only." And thus began a place with no menu, no rush, and no sharp expectations. Just corners for curling up and warm sips for people who had too many tabs open in their thoughts. And when guests arrived, they didn't speak loudly or ask for specifics. They whispered soft requests like a mug of quiet steeped in yesterday's peace, or a slice of something that tastes like childhood naps. And Dionysus, without question, would serve them cups of chamomile memory foam or sleepy date scones wrapped in kindness parchment. And if anyone ever spoke above a whisper, a soft bell would chime and a pillow would gently fall from the ceiling as a reminder that rest doesn't shout. And Koro the raven, now part-time bouncer, would tilt his head and stare disapprovingly until they apologized to their own stress, and there were hammock booths labeled for emotional overwhelm, and soft fuzz nooks for people who hadn't exhaled in months, and one visitor, a retired hero, with sore knees and battle dreams, whispered, "Do you serve second chances?" To which Dionysus handed him a warm fig wrap and said, "Only when warmed gently," and the man napped mid-bite, weeping softly into a cushion that smelled like safety, and word of the nap cafe drifted like mist, not viral, not loud, but like a lullaby carried on the back of the breeze, and even temples tried to replicate it but forgot the main ingredient, softness, and you, dear listener. Maybe you too are curled in that cafe now, letting your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, and if you order a warm pause with extra stillness and a side of forgiveness, I promise, it's already being prepared. Just whisper it, and let the hush answer back. It was woven not by gods, nor by mortals, but by accident, strands of dusk thread and breeze lint caught in a spinning wheel that no one remembered building, and when Dionysus found the blanket folded beneath a fig tree where someone had once napped and never quite woke fully, he wrapped it around his shoulders and instantly felt like he'd been held by 100 quiet afternoons. Because this wasn't an ordinary blanket, it was thick with echoes, each fibre humming with old naps, some brief, some tear-soaked, some dreamless and warm like buttered silence. And when he lay down with it that night, he didn't just sleep, he travelled, slipping through layered memories that weren't his but felt like borrowed lullabies, feeling the pulse of a toddler who once fell asleep mid-giggle, the steady snore of an elderly baker who'd wrapped herself in it during a thunderstorm, the soft panic of a poet who couldn't write but finally let himself rest anyway. And Dionysus woke with tear tracks and a half smile, whispering, "This blanket knows things." And so he placed it in the centre of his villa, on a chaise that never creaked, and invited anyone who couldn't sleep to try it. And one by one they came. Not for advice, not for wine, but for that impossible fabric of second chances, and each one left feeling slightly more whole, as if the blanket had whispered back, "You're allowed to rest." And Koro the raven refused to perch on it, muttering, "Too emotional." But once, during a rainy afternoon, even he tucked one clawed foot beneath its edge and stayed unmoving for 3 hours, and soon a quiet ritual formed. Those who napped on the blanket left behind a word, written on a fig leaf, tucked gently in a basket nearby, words like forgiveness, again, almost, mother, finally, and Dionysus never read them. But he said the blanket did because it grew warmer with each leaf, heavier but not burdensome, like it was learning the shape of humanity's sleep. And even those who claimed they couldn't nap, the anxious, the restless, the constantly busy, would lay down for just a moment and wake up 90 heartbeats later with a softness behind their eyes. And maybe you tonight are wrapped in a version of that blanket too. Maybe this very story is its thread curling gently around your shoulders, reminding you that it's okay to pause, to exhale, to let the day unravel at the seams, because the blanket remembers for you. It holds the naps you forgot to take, the ones you cut short, the ones you never gave yourself permission for. So just lie back, let go, and be held by the warmth of every rest you've ever deserved. It began not with drums, not with trumpets, not even with a goat in a hat, but with a single yawn, long, sincere, and unintentionally theatrical, let out by a sleepy olive vendor named Cleo as she stretched beside her stall at sunrise, and that yawn, that humble exhale, rippled through the village like a soft wave of dominoes. For everyone nearby began yawning too, the kind of yawns that unlock shoulders and blink back tears you didn't know were waiting. And Dionysus, who just happened to be reclining nearby with grapes he wasn't eating, looked up and whispered, "Did we just all agree to rest?" And that's when it began. The festival of the yawn, held once a year, or whenever enough people were too tired to resist it. Or instead of dancing or competing or performing, villagers gathered to do absolutely nothing on purpose, arriving in slippers, wearing robes of sleep-coloured hues, and carrying their favourite naps in progress as if they were offerings to the gods of gentle paws, and booths popped up not with trinkets or fried cheese sticks, but with hammock tastings, pillow comparison lounges, and a booth labelled "Whisper Your Regrets to a Blanket," where people sighed their worries into fabric and left lighter than they arrived, and Cora the Raven emceed the opening ceremony with a silent wing raise and no words, just a blink that meant shh. And instead of fireworks, soft glows of enchanted moss rose into the night sky, pulsing with the rhythm of collective exhalation. And one contest involved who could fall asleep fastest to the sound of gently stirring soup. Spoiler, a toddler won, and Dionysus himself offered complimentary bedtime snacks like cloudberries soaked in memory foam syrup or warm toast topped with melted daydreams. And no one clapped after performances. They just nodded slowly or raised a mug of sleep tea in quiet respect, and every yawn was met with a chorus of matching yawns like a choir that only knew one note. And as the festival went on, people forgot the urgency they had carried in their spines, replaced by the rhythm of rocking chairs, the lull of slow stories, the bliss of letting go of multitasking, and by the end of it, no one was crowned or declared winner. But every guest left with heavier eyelids and a lighter soul, and Dionysus, watching the sun rise on the final morning, whispered to the sky, "All great revolutions begin with a yawn." And maybe tonight, dear listener, your yawn is the first note of your own private festival, an invitation to the part of you that's been waiting for permission to rest. So go ahead, yawn without apology, let your jaws stretch open and your shoulders follow, and as that invisible wave flows through your bones, know that you're not alone. You're at the festival, surrounded by quiet applause and gentle nods, and the celebration of soft surrender has already begun. It began as most dreams do, without permission, without explanation, just a sudden awareness that Dionysus was standing in a place that felt both familiar and impossibly made of soup, where the clouds looked like folded napkins, and the floor was gently pulsing like a soft heartbeat made of woven lullabies. And he didn't remember falling asleep, didn't remember blinking, but he was there, and the sky above him hummed a tune that didn't ask for understanding. And as he walked, the world shifted not around him, but with him, the way memories sometimes do when you are trying to remember what you forgot on purpose. And he passed a bookstore where the shelves were filled with unread naps, pages fluttering in slow motion, whispering "not yet" in languages that only exist when you're half awake. And he waved to a cat that might have been his grandmother, or his regret, or both, and kept walking until he found a bench that didn't exist, but insisted he sit anyway. And when he did, a soft voice beside him said, "You're dreaming." And Dionysus turned to find a version of himself made entirely of mist and fig jam, smiling with the tired eyes of someone who had seen every party and still chose quiet. And the dream version said, "You'll forget all of this." And Dionysus nodded, because of course he would. That's what dreams do. They visit, they whisper, they evaporate. But then he looked down and noticed something strange. He wasn't dreaming this dream. The dream was dreaming him, imagining a Dionysus who needed to be reminded of softness. And in that moment, the world blinked. The clouds folded inward, and he felt himself dissolve not with fear but with relief, like a poem forgetting its last line on purpose. And just as he began to fade, he heard a child's voice say, "But if a dream forgets it's a dream, is it still resting?" And the question floated with him, like a question shaped like a blanket. And when he woke, if he even woke, he was lying on a carpet of moss that hadn't been there before, clutching a fig he didn't remember picking and smiling at the taste of something he couldn't name. And maybe tonight, you too are inside a dream that forgot it was pretending. Maybe your thoughts are floating somewhere between what was real and what felt like a story your soul needed to invent. And that's okay, because sleep isn't always about escape. Sometimes it's about returning to the version of you that remembers how to be held by nothing at all. So close your eyes, let your story blur at the edges, and trust that whatever shape this night takes, it's dreaming you back into yourself. It wasn't majestic, or glowing, or carried on the wind like a message from Olympus. In fact, the feather looked rather ordinary, slightly bent, cream-coloured with a smudge of grape jelly near the tip. And Dionysus found it drifting through his courtyard not forward, but backwards, bobbing lazily against the current of the air, as if it had missed its original destination and was politely reversing course to try again. And he watched it. Of course he did. Because Dionysus had learned that sometimes the softest things carry the deepest meanings. and as it brushed past a vine leaf, the entire villa seemed to take a breath. Not in, but out, as if the world itself was exhaling in slow motion, and the feather hovered, almost choosing where to land, before settling gently on the cushion beside him. And when he picked it up, it felt warm, like a hug from someone who already forgave you, and he didn't ask whose it was or why it moved the way it did, because some things don't explain themselves. They just arrive when needed. And for the rest of the day, he carried it behind his ear, feeling a strange calm, like he had accidentally remembered something he wasn't meant to forget, like the way silence hums when you let it, or the way sleep doesn't chase you but waits patiently at the edge of your thoughts. And that night before bed, he placed the feather on his bedside table right next to a cup of cooled fig nectar and a half-read scroll titled The Art of Doing Nothing, and he whispered, not to the feather, but to whatever had sent it, "Thank you for not hurrying." And as he drifted into the slowest sleep imaginable, one without dreams, without metaphors, just warmth, somewhere in the sky the feather began to rise again. Not away, not forward, but softly, backwards, as if returning to where it had once been held before it was ever needed. And maybe you too, dear listener, have been chasing forward all day, all week, all life. But tonight, let this be your invitation to float backwards for once. Not to undo, not to unbe, but to gently remember the softness that was always behind you, waiting, resting, unfolding its arms like a hammock under the stars. And now let that final breath guide you home, weightless, backward, peaceful. So now, let it rest. You've reached the gentle gate. There's nothing left to do. No call to action. No scroll to deliver. Just sleep. Peaceful. Warm. Carried. The last relay never ends. It simply becomes your next dream. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. If you drifted off, let me know below. Sweet dreams. Until next time, this was boring Greek myths for sleep, whispering you to stillness. Good night.